Successful woman encounters her former nanny who used to abuse her, living on the streets. A life marked by mistakes. Regret on the frozen streets of a city that never sleeps. Marlene, a woman who lost everything, carries the memories of a painful past. Jane, a successful woman, bears wounds that never healed. But fate has a way of bringing reunions that can change everything. When the past and present collide, can forgiveness heal all wounds? Marlene, a woman who once worked as a nanny in a modest neighborhood, now lived on the streets. Time had been cruel to her, and her reality was desolate. Her days were marked by survival routines. She woke up early to the sound of cars and the frantic movement of the city. Her few belongings, stored in an old shopping cart, were all that remained of the life she once knew. The winter on the streets was relentless. As the cutting wind passed through her body, her bones ached and exhaustion took over her legs, weakened by age and deprivation. Hunger, a constant companion, forced Marlene to rummage through restaurant trash bins in search of scraps. "How did I end up here?" she asked herself daily. However, what tormented her most wasn't the physical misery or the need to beg. The loneliness and weight of her past mistakes were the chains that kept her prisoner. Memories came like ghosts, especially at night when, alone under a thin and dirty blanket, she tried in vain to fend off the cold and dark thoughts. She recalled when she had a house, even a modest one, and a job that, though poorly paid, gave her some sense of purpose. Caring for the neighbor's children, though it was an arduous and exhausting task, had been her source of income. But back then, Marlene was a bitter woman. Her frustration with her own life often spilled over and affected the innocent children under her care. One of those children was Jane, a shy girl, the daughter of neighbors who could barely support themselves. Jane had always been a quiet child, observant, and in many ways invisible to Marlene. Consumed by her own bitterness, Marlene treated Jane coldly, offering little to no affection. She was harsh with the girl in moments of anger, taking out all her pent-up frustrations from a life full of disappointments on her. However, now on the streets, abandoned by fate and haunted by the choices she had made, Jane's face often appeared in Marlene's thoughts. "If only I had been different," she muttered to herself, feeling a tightness in her chest every time she remembered the sad expression in the girl's eyes. Maybe my life would have been different if I had been better to her," she reflected as the days dragged on without any hope in sight. At night, when the city lights shone in the distance, Marlene watched the street movement, but for her, everything seemed shrouded in darkness. The memories of the mistakes she had made were constant, as if each passerby who ignored her was a living reminder of how society now saw her, someone unimportant, someone they preferred to overlook. As she walked through the city's streets, Marlene endlessly relived the moments that led to her current situation. Each step seemed to remind her of a past mistake, the choices she had made, the opportunities she had let slip, the people she had mistreated. Especially Jane, the girl's face, whom she had mistreated so many times, now haunted her. "Marlene, why were you never kinder to her?" she asked herself, as if speaking to her younger self. The memories of Jane, a poor and defenseless girl, were the most painful. Jane's mother, a tired and hard-working woman, trusted Marlene to care for her daughter while she worked long hours. But to Marlene, Jane was never more than a burden. On one of those cold nights, Marlene dreamed of Jane. In the dream, the girl was sitting on a small chair, holding an old and worn-out doll. Jane looked at Marlene with the same sad eyes she remembered, and in the dream, the girl said something she never had in real life. "I just wanted you to be kind to me." Marlene woke up with her heart racing and tears streaming down her face. "What have I done?" she muttered to herself. The regret was like an open wound that never healed. She thought of the days when Jane fell to the ground and cried, and Marlene simply ignored her, sometimes even getting irritated by the child's tears. Or the times when a hungry Jane waited for food, and Marlene would only offer leftovers with a look of disdain. "I was terrible to her," she admitted to herself. As she wandered the streets, Marlene felt her life was doomed to this cycle of pain and regret. Society had discarded her, just as she had, in a way, discarded Jane. But deep down, The desire for redemption followed her constantly. Was there still time for an apology? Jane was probably far away, both physically and emotionally. She must hate me, Marlene thought, with the conviction of someone who feels it's too late for any kind of redemption. The exhaustion from life on the streets, combined with the weight of her guilt, made Marlene feel increasingly old and weak. Yet despite everything, a small spark of hope still remained in her heart, though it was hard to believe in it. Does Jane still think about me somehow? She wondered, knowing that the answer was probably negative. After all, who would remember someone who brought so much pain? Jane, now an adult, was a completely different woman from the shy, scared child Marlene once knew. Her difficult childhood, marked by neglect from her former nanny, had fueled her determination. Today, Jane was a respected executive holding a high position in a multinational company. To the world, she was the epitome of success and resilience. But deep down, Jane still carried deep scars. Though distant, her childhood had not been fully overcome. The memories of Marlene, with her coldness and disdain, were still vivid in her mind. Why was she so cruel? Jane would wonder in the rare moments of introspection her busy life allowed. Despite all her success, moments of insecurity still crept in, times when the little girl who sought affection from Marlene surfaced within the strong, confident woman she had become. One night, while in her luxurious apartment, Jane reflected on her journey. Outside, the city lights shone like a reflection of her successful career, but inside, she still felt incomplete. The memories of Marlene and the cold days when she was ignored or treated indifferently often resurfaced. Is the success I've achieved enough to fill this void? Jane asked herself without finding an answer. The marks left by Marlene went beyond her coldness. They had planted seeds of doubt in Jane, which, even in adulthood, made her question her own worth. Even after achieving so much, part of Jane still wondered if she truly deserved what she had. If the woman who cared for me didn't think I was worth anything, why should anyone else? She would think in moments of vulnerability. Despite everything, Jane never told anyone about the impact Marlene had on her life. She believed that by hiding this part of her story, she could maintain the facade of a strong and independent woman. However, the memories were always there, lurking, waiting for the moment to emerge. And though she didn't know it, that moment was about to come in an unexpected way. It was a day like any other. Jane had just left an important meeting and decided to stop at a coffee shop for a drink before her next appointment. She sat near the window, watching the city's movement while reviewing some documents on her tablet. It was one of those rare moments of calm in her hectic routine. Life seemed under control. However, something caught her attention. Across the street, an elderly woman with dirty clothes and disheveled hair was rummaging through a trash bin. The scene was common in a big city like that, but there was something about that woman that held Jane's attention. Her heart began to beat faster. "It can't be," she murmured to herself. The woman, bent by age and hardship, had a familiar face. Jane looked closer, and her body froze. It was Marlene. Jane leaned back in her chair, unable to process what she was seeing. The woman who had mistreated her so much as a child, who had ignored her cries and despised her hunger, was now living on the streets, surviving on scraps, begging for food. A flood of emotions overcame Jane: anger, sadness, surprise, and, unexpectedly, a twinge of compassion. Without thinking much, Jane stood up and crossed the street. Each step was a mix of hesitation and determination. When she was close enough, she called out, "Marlene!" The woman stopped rummaging through the trash and slowly lifted her head. Her aged, tired eyes widened as she recognized Jane. Is it you, Jane?" Marlene stammered, incredulous. The silence between them was almost palpable. Jane didn't know what to say. What does one say to someone who caused so much pain? And yet, there was Marlene, a shadow of the woman she once knew. Jane took a deep breath. "Yes, it's me." After the unexpected encounter, Jane spent the rest of the day with her mind occupied by the image of Marlene. While attending meetings and completing her professional duties, her thoughts were elsewhere. The image of Marlene, rummaging through the trash for food, wouldn't leave her mind. The woman who had hurt her so much was now in the worst possible situation, and, even if she wanted to, Jane couldn't ignore the irony and sadness of that reality. At the end of the workday, Jane made a decision. She would return to the place where she had seen Marlene. She didn't know exactly why. Perhaps, deep down, she wanted to understand what this all meant to her. She needed to close that chapter of her life or maybe give it new meaning. "Why do I care so much?" she muttered to herself as she walked back to the spot where she had seen Marlene. The streets were already dark by the time Jane finally spotted Marlene again. The former nanny was sitting next to a trash bin, her hands dirty, looking even more defeated than before. When she heard Jane's footsteps, Marlene lifted her head, and her eyes reflected a mixture of surprise and confusion. "What are you doing here?" Marlene asked, her voice hoarse and weary. "I told you I would come back," Jane replied, still unsure of her own intentions. The silence between them felt heavier than ever. Jane took a deep breath and, with a firm voice, asked, "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" Marlene looked down at the ground, unable to respond. "I'm nothing more than what you see," she muttered, pointing to herself. "I deserve this. All of it." Jane felt a pang in her chest. Marlene's words affected her in a way she hadn't expected. The woman who had hurt her so much was now broken, stripped of any dignity. Jane didn't know exactly how she felt, but in that moment, she realized she couldn't just leave Marlene there. "Come with me," Jane said, extending her hand. The next morning, Jane woke up with a sense of restlessness. The encounter with Marlene had affected her more than she cared to admit. She couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had caused her so much pain in the past, now so vulnerable and full of regret. "Why do I care about this?" she asked herself as she stared out the window of her apartment. Maybe it was the weight of the unresolved past, or maybe it was something deeper, something related to forgiveness. Determined to understand what she was feeling, Jane returned to the hotel where she had left Marlene the night before. Upon entering the room, she found her former nanny sitting on the edge of the bed, staring off into space. The scene was sad, and Jane felt a tightening in her chest as she saw her like that. "Marlene?" she called softly. Marlene raised her head, surprised to see Jane there again. "You came back," she said in a low voice, as if she hadn't expected Jane to really return. I don't know what to say." Jane sat next to her, watching her for a few moments before finally speaking. "I've thought a lot about what happened yesterday, about what you said, and I realized that, as much as you hurt me in the past, everyone deserves a second chance." Marlene, not fully understanding where Jane was going with this, just nodded. "I'm already old, Jane. I don't know what I can do now. My life, there's nothing left for me." "That's not true," Jane replied with conviction. "I can help you. I have a position at my company, something you can do. It's not much, but it's a fresh start. You'll have a salary, a place to live, a new life." Marlene looked at Jane, incredulous. "You're offering me a job? After everything I did to you?" "Yes," Jane said. "I'm offering you a chance to start over. The past is already behind us, Marlene. What matters now is what you're going to do from here on." Marlene began to cry, unable to hold back the tears. I don't know what to say. I don't know if I deserve this." "You do," Jane said with a gentle smile. "Everyone deserves a second chance." And so, in that hotel room, something inside Marlene changed. For the first time in many years, she felt hope. The future, which had once seemed empty and without prospects, now offered her a new opportunity. She accepted Jane's offer and, over time, began to rebuild her life. She worked hard, and although she never forgot her past mistakes, she knew life had given her a chance at redemption. As for Jane, she finally found peace. By offering Marlene a second chance, she had also found a way to heal her own wounds. Both women moved forward, with the certainty that forgiveness and compassion can transform even the most painful stories.